So before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the First Nations and Native American peoples. Here where I am in Vancouver, those peoples are the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. But I know where many of you are, you're on the land of other nations. Always, but especially during this difficult time, let us remember our connection to our sisters and brothers in these nations and pray for the day in which we might be with them in right relationship. Welcome. Welcome to Living Interfaith. Know that the whole of you is welcome. You're not asked to leave who you are in your own homes. Please bring who you are in with you. But what you are asked to remember is that everyone around you has brought who they are in with them as well. And all of goodwill are welcome. Let us sing. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bruce and Cheryl. So I have just a few announcements. The first is that our friend and teacher, Harold Rosen from the Baha'i community, he's been running these wonderful series for us. He's running a series for the Spiritual Path to Awakening, which is another organization. This one will be about the afterlife and how it's understood in different faith traditions. So it's going to start on January 11th and run for 6 weeks on Tuesdays. So January 11th through February 15th. It'll be every Tuesday from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And the topics are going to be near-death experience and research, indigenous beliefs and practices, South Asian beliefs. He goes through, it'll be Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Confucian, Taoist, Shinto, Zoroastrian, Islamic, Jewish, Hellenic, and Christian, and then Baha'i, all understandings of the afterlife. So it should be just amazing. He's the only person I've ever met who could teach something like this. I really just can't say enough good things about Harold. So if you'd like to sign up, I will put, let's see, if you email the Spiritual Path to Awakening folks, you can get signed up for this. I know his classes are usually either free or very inexpensive. So I don't want to say that this is free if it is not, but I bet it is very inexpensive and you'll certainly learn a lot. So if you're interested, you can sign up there, just write to the folks. I just put them in the chat. Otherwise, yes, if you're interested, I still have Multi-Faith Action Society calendars. I have a few more. We're almost to 2022. The theme is resilience. And as I mentioned, we got, oh my word, we got more than 1,000 submissions at the Multi-Faith Action Society of these just different beautiful pictures. And then this goes through about 500 different special occasions, religious holidays, anything you could imagine. And you can learn a lot about other traditions from this. So if you're interested, I still have a big box here. Just write to me and I can be sure to mail you one. It can be my Christmas or Hanukkah present to you. So perfect. So I think that's the only announcements I have. Does anyone have any other announcements at this time? Yes, Stephen?
Just a quick, I am now in receipt of that beautiful calendar and can speak for the fact that it is wonderfully interfaith or multi-faith, informational and beautiful. And if you don't have one, it's worth having.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, if that's it, let's just come into silence for a moment and we'll get started. God with us, as we wait for the dawning of Christmas Day, as our souls long for your presence among us, let us remember those places that are still under military occupation in the midst of our celebrations, still places lacking justice, full of division and fear. God with us, in whom there's neither Gentile nor Jew, neither slave nor free, in Palestine, the land of Christ's birth, come to the hungry places, bringing hope. Come to the dark places, bringing justice. Come to the lonely places, bringing love. Come again in Bethlehem. Come in us and through us, and even despite us, that all may join in the angel's song. Glory to God in the highest. Let there be joy. Amen. From the Church of Scotland. We light this candle today to remember that Christ is born anew amongst us. Our Advent waiting will soon be complete, yet our yearning for justice is but rekindled. As we continue to work and wait, let us call for God to show us the path of justice and peace, and together let us co-create God's final reconciliation of all beings. Amen. Now let us share a passing of the peace. This is when you can unmute yourselves and say something like, peace be with you as well. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace.
Walaikum salam.
Peace.
Peace be with you.
Peace, everyone.
Shalom.
Peace be
Shalom,
with you.
salam, peace.
Peace, everyone.
Beautiful. And when you're ready, let's sing.
Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strains. Gloria in excelsis Deo, Gloria in excelsis Deo. Shepherds, what's going on?
I don't know.
Click here. There we go. Shepherds, why this jubilee? Why your joyous strains prolong? What the gladsome tidings be, which inspire your heavenly song? Gloria in excelsis Deo.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, it is standard to do the Gloria part all in one breath, right? That's how all the singers do it. I don't know.
Just sing.
I just remember as a kid, like, okay, you gotta prepare for that. It's glorious. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Now, if you join me in our joint affirmation, we come together in peace. We sing together in joy and with love. We worship together in one house, a house with names beyond number. Our paths are many, our beliefs are as leaves, and the tree that we cleave to is nourished by the light of compassion, justice, and mutual respect. May our lives, our beliefs, and our actions help to bring about the world of love we all seek, and let it begin here. Thank you. Now is when we usually pray in our own homes and in our own ways for something in the world. As always, there are so many things and so many people that need our prayers right now. But given that today we are celebrating Christmas in Palestine, I think it'd be helpful to pray for our Palestinian friends who are still living under military occupation. So let's take a few moments now just to pray. Thank you. Thank you. And when you're ready, let's sing.
Come, radiant one, fill our world with your promise. Come, shining presence, fill our world with your
Beautiful. Thank you. And I think that's an original, if I read that correctly. That was beautiful. Now is when I like to say I'd usually pass around a basket. In lieu of that, I'll put our donation page in the chat. So many of you already donate and support us. It's been just so fantastic. We were able to hire a managing director, Sukmani, who's helping so much, and we're just so grateful for your donations. So thank you very much for that. And also, if there are any other groups that need, I know so many do, that need any support at this time. I know Stephen had to drop off to go to the other service, but Doctors Without Borders is doing much needed work around the world. So if we have some extra funds to send their way, are there any other groups that need some financial help or other assistance at this time?
Rabbis for Human Rights does great work in Israel and Palestine. So it's not the place that Kathy and I have donated to previously and that people could consider donating to.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, one of my favorite humans in the world is Rabbi Asherman, who started Rabbis for Human Rights. And he used to say he'd wear his tali and he'd have the Torah scroll and he'd be standing on top of Palestinian houses that were going to be knocked down and praying and trying to beseech the people driving the bulldozers to stop and to protect the houses. And so they do really amazing work like that. Lots of other work too. But thank you for reminding us of them, Stephen, Rabbis for Human Rights.
So I have a friend whose daughter is a Médecins Sans Frontières doctor in Gaza. So she's there right now and dealing with really, really difficult situations there. So.
Absolutely. And what did you say the name of the organization is?
MSF.
MSF.
Doctors Without Borders.
Doctors Without Borders. Perfect.
Yes. But I can't tell you her name to pray for her because she can't have any publicity.
That makes
because
sense.
she needs to be able to get in and out of Gaza.
We'll definitely be thinking about her. My goodness. Thank you.
Doctors Without Borders, at least I think the French version of that organization is active in Afghanistan right now too, I believe, where human tragedy threatens to kill more Afghanis than have died during the 20 years of war in the aftermath of starvation that's going on there. So I don't know if our gifts from Canada and the US reach the French side of Doctors Without Borders, but I'm sure gifts to the larger organization help everywhere. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cliff. All right. Thanks so much, friends. And when you're ready, let's sing.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Beautiful. Thank you. And now it's my joy to turn it over to my friend, Shadia Qubti. I met Shadia at the Vancouver School of Theology, where she's studying right now. And I won't say more about what she's doing because I'm sure she's going to mention it at some point, probably. But if not, I can tell you later. It's really, really cool. And we're just so happy to have her with us today to talk about Christmas in Palestine. So thank you, Shadia. Over to you.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation, and it's God to be with you. I think I just want to start off by saying that this is probably one of my first times speaking about Israel, Palestine, and my context in an interfaith setting. I know this topic is quite sensitive and it affects everyone and directly or indirectly. So I bear that in mind as I try to speak and represent my experience coming from Israel and Palestine. I thought today, I mean, it's a very informal conversation just to share with you what it is, what's it like to be a Palestinian Christian in my context. And I'm currently in Vancouver. I am studying at Vancouver School of Theology. This is my second year, so it's quite a different context than there. But I just bear in mind that I come from a context that calls for exclusion, and it's quite defensive. And I try as much as I can to steer away from that, to try to be respectful of everyone here. Before I start, I don't know how much you know about Israel-Palestine, but I know everyone who knows about it thinks it's very complicated. And it is like that because of the different systems in play that really divide. It's all about dividing people and treating people within the settings that they are geographically. So as a Palestinian, there are 5 groups of Palestinians, and where they live really dictates their access to resources and different rights. So there's kind of the ones that come up in the news a lot is Gaza. There's about 2 million in Gaza. West Bank, the occupied territories, about I think 4 million. And then we have East Jerusalem, and they kind of have their own status. Some of them have no status. They have a travel document, and some of them have Palestinian, some of them have Jordanian. It's a very contested area, especially recently in the news. And then there are Palestinians who live in Israel and they have Israeli citizenship. This is the group I belong to. And then we have Palestinians in the diaspora, including in Canada as well. So as a Palestinian who lives in Israel, that means that when Israel was established, there were still Palestinians who lived in the Green Line or in the borders of the state. And so I belong to that group. I was, and just to note, that it wasn't necessarily for the first 20 years, we were under a military occupation. And then after 67, we have Israeli citizenship. So I have Israeli passport. I travel under that. Israel has majority Jewish people, 21%. Then the second largest is a Muslim community, Christians. There's also Druze, there's Baha'is, there's also Mormons. So it's really diverse religious communities who live there. And Christians amount up to 1.5% of the Israeli population. It's really about 150,000. You know, there's Nazareth has the largest concentrations of Christian Palestinians in Israel. This is where I grew up. This is my hometown. There are a variety of denominations. The majority is Greek Orthodox, Roman and Latin Catholic. We have also more Eastern denominations, Maronites, Melkites, Coptic, Syriac. There's also Protestants, Anglicans, Lutherans, Evangelical. There's also Armenian Christian, Ethiopian Christian, Russian Orthodox Christian. I mean, this is all in this small piece of land. Ethnically, we identify as Arab. There are many different types of Arabs, and our particularity is Palestinian. That means we have a distinct heritage, a relationship to our geographical origin, customs, whether it's the different symbols, the foods. And I think, you know, as a Palestinian who grew up in Israel, we're influenced by several cultures. There's the Arab culture. There's also the Western culture, because of our connection with sister churches around the world. But we're also, as someone who grew up in Israel, there's an influence of an Israeli culture. In school, I learned Hebrew. I can speak Hebrew. My native language is Arabic. So you have that experiencing different cultures. And my people group, the Palestinians from Israel, they have, one of my researches I did, there's more than 33 references calling that people group. Because we, from an Israeli perspective, we're called Israeli Arabs, but that's terminology is not embraced by everyone, because there is a understanding that it's trying to erase our Palestinian culture. So we don't refer ourselves to that. Some do, some don't. I prefer to say the Palestinian with Israeli citizenship. Of course, that reflects we have an identity crisis, because we experience this cultural erasure and appropriation by the Israeli conflict. Recently, the Miss Universe, I don't know if you've heard of it, like the Miss Universe contest was in Israel, and one day they all went and wore Palestinian embroidery as part of the Israeli experience, and that really made a lot of noise, because it's these constant experiences of trying to claim something that's Palestinian but call it differently. So there's, when you come to say about being Palestinian Christian, it's hard really to separate my religious experience from my cultural, ethnic, political experience. It's really all mashed together. And so personally, my family, my parents my dad is Coptic, my mom is Greek Orthodox, but they grew up as surprisingly Baptist. So I've had a Baptist upbringing, which also explains my language. I learned it through my family context, because of the war in 1948. My mother was raised in a Southern Baptist orphanage, where many children who were either left behind or their family, they don't know what happened to them. The Baptist mission started an orphanage, and my father, Nazareth was one of the cities that wasn't destroyed during the establishment of the state. They started a school. And you'll see that a lot in Israel, Palestine. There's a lot of Christian institutions that really took the place of the government because of the need that was there, whether it's a hospital, schools, and so on. So because of my family context, I grew up in quite a diverse upbringing. We had I had a Jewish aunt, American, Western, and Middle Eastern. It's funny coming from that context. We even had a cousin one day just show up in our house, and she's like, "Oh, I'm from Australia. My father is this," and there's all these connections that when the political situation changed, people tried to come back or look for their Palestinian roots. I'm the youngest of 6, and as a Arab culture, we all my cousins and extended cousins and the whole Coptic family lives in one neighborhood. So the family experience is that we all live really next to each other, and that's a really privilege, I think, coming from that context. Also, my family name Coptic, it comes from so Christianity is not just a personal, or it's not just an experience, it's also a heritage. At some point in the 18th century, one family from Egypt moved to Israel and Palestine and settled in, and they started being called Coptic. So that's where my heritage comes from. And Coptics believe that they were the Egyptians who converted to Christianity when the Apostle Mark went that direction. So there's that also understanding that Christian presence in the land it's still connected to the biblical narrative after throughout history, and regardless of the empires that came and left, the locals stayed, and they kind of became known as the gatekeepers of the Holy Land, of holy places. But also because of our connection to Western Christian churches, we have also had a privilege to have access to schools, to education. And so Palestinian Christians, relatively, the majority of them are highly educated. They have white collar jobs, and their contribution to society is quite significant. So this leads me to talk about Christmas. My experience of Christmas, we're a minority among a minority. So it's not as shabby, and it's not as big as here. And usually, let's say in Nazareth, we'll have Christmas lights and we'll have some feeling of Christmas, but you just go 5 minutes to the next town and there's nothing there, nothing happening about Christmas. So you have that particular experience as experiencing your religious holidays as a minority. Usually around Christmas, it's also Hanukkah. And so sometimes they come together, sometimes they don't, which is good because during university times, as a student, you have to follow the majority or the national holidays. And so many times Christmas falls in during exams period. I mean, similar to here, but you don't really get a lot of time off for that. So there's that trying to accommodate yourself to the majority calendars as well. Even just if you think of, what is the weekend, right? For a Jewish majority, it's Shabbat, so it's Friday, Saturday. For Muslims, it's Friday, Sunday. For Christians, it's Saturday and Sunday. So that it's kind of a privilege in some ways because you always have access to go and do some shopping, even though one area is closed, the other one is open for you. But also that means we have limited access to certain commercialized Christmas, like here, you have one type of Christmas candy that we stock up on. I mean, it's changing more and more now, but you still have that limited access to things. But it's also internal marketing. I mean, two cities that really celebrate Christmas are Nazareth and Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is in the West Bank. And of course, that's where the Christmas or the Nativity took place. So they have a much more pronounced expression of Christmas. But Nazareth, since it's in Israel, it also becomes a marketing location for bringing internal tourists to come and experience Christmas. Usually we'll have a big family dinner. So when my immediate family comes together, we're about 20 people. The weather is still tolerable, so we usually have, the typical Middle Eastern salads and barbecue meat, and we sit together and we enjoy that time. There's also some advantages of being a minority in that context. You can do your last minute shopping and not worry about supplies or running out of things, or you have also, because we have Eastern and Western Christians, you celebrate Christmas at least twice. In the Western calendar, it's 24th. The Eastern calendar, it's the 6th. So it's a good thing for families because you can celebrate with different cousins and aunts and celebrate with them as well. There's also Armenian Christmas and Ethiopian Christmas. I remember when I was working in Jerusalem, we always had these, so Christmas is about a month where you can take off or you have different advantages to celebrate. So there's that quite big diversity, but let's not forget we're also in a context that calls for exclusivity. So not every setting and not every place your religious identity is embraced. It's seen as a threat, and everyone tries to, in that setting, there is a monopoly or attempted monopoly over victimhood. Who's more of a victim? Who suffers more? And it's quite disheartening, and sometimes it doesn't reflect reality. Let's see. I think there's a big challenge. I mean, even the name, right? We all know it's the Holy Land. I think it's a very misleading naming of it. Yes, it does have sacred places, but is it really holy? I would challenge that. Many people who come to Jerusalem and work, especially in the humanitarian sector, many lose their faith because of the grave injustice that happens there. And that's one of the challenges for people who come expecting this divine experience, and they really grapple with the ugliness of contestation over religious places. But there's also that people hold a specific, many Christians, especially around the world, when you say, I am from Nazareth, they're like, oh yeah, Jesus of Nazareth, that's your hometown. It's true, but it's, many times we have an image of these holy places, the holy stories that keep it in a certain time and in a certain atmosphere that's more romantic than reality. And so I don't have that privilege to keep the nativity story at that time and place, but rather challenge to see it in its reality today and what it's like. And again, I mean, the church is not just the place for your spiritual journey, it's also your social and cultural experience. We live in quite condensed and crowded towns, and there's no parks available in many of the Palestinian places. So the church becomes that social hub for you to play, to engage in cultural experiences. And, you know, as someone from Nazareth and meeting people from Bethlehem or from Jerusalem, we always have these internal competitions, right? I mean, granted, we say Jesus lives for 30 years in Nazareth, but Nazareth doesn't get as much attention as Jerusalem or Bethlehem. But we have several jokes and ideas. If we have time, we can talk about that and give you some of the inside jokes we talk about. Especially during Christmas, I think many churches around the world, you know, sing songs that have Bethlehem on it, or remember that it read the nativity story. And think for us, we feel that we have a complicated relationship with Western Christianity, because on one hand, we share the same faith, but we feel that many times our relationship to those churches are compromised or sidelines in favor of other agendas that the church sees more important. And so we always, as Palestinian Christians, we try to bring attention to the current reality and really emphasize that what we believe in, whatever you believe, whatever your theology about God is, there are people who are directly being impacted by it. So we just try to remind our brothers and sisters around the world that be careful of your theology, because it has a direct impact on our survival as a church. I mean, so as Palestinians, our immediate neighbors are Muslim Palestinians. Majority of them are Sunni. There's been a shared history together for centuries. When nationalism started, that was kind of a way for Christians and Palestinians and Muslims to live together under a shared ideology. But of course, radical Islam has challenged also the relationship between Muslims and Christians, especially their own prejudice against one another, exasperated by the political context. So not to say that everything is great, but these are challenges similar to any other place where politics tries to distinguish people based on their religious affiliation. And relationship with Israeli Jews as well. I mean, Israel, Palestine is a very small piece of land. Interaction is inevitable, especially if you're in Israel. But I remember, I mean, during my university, my time in Israeli university, as much as I tried to assimilate and to adapt many cultural and language, you're still treated as a goy, as a Gentile, and so you're not one of us. So there's that rejection and inability to be welcomed as an Israeli because you are not Jewish. And so as someone who, So as someone who took on peacemaking and tried to see how you can advocate for peace in such a contested context, especially within the religious sector, I think the biggest challenge is how can faith play a positive contribution to the conflict, and how can we see each other's humanity, each other's suffering in a way that builds us to change the current reality and change our behaviors and hopefully policies as well. You know, I think many times, I don't know about you, but how many times have you heard Palestinian Christians speak? There is a sense that our voice isn't heard as much because we, in some ways, complicate the simplistic dualistic narrative of the conflict, assuming, you know, it's just two sides and it's two sides against one another. But Palestinian Christians really challenge that because it's not as easy as we'd like to think it is. So when we look at the nativity story, right, a child is born, he's the Messiah, the Prince of Peace, and comes to the world that also that context wasn't, wasn't peaceful. There was Roman occupation. Joseph and Mary had to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem to get to a manger. And so we try to extract from these stories elements and virtues that can help us deal with our context. And I think one thing is important in being born in the Holy Land is that we have a much better understanding of the geography. So just to imagine Joseph and Mary, you know, whether it's walking or on a donkey to Bethlehem, that's quite a long journey. Even going to Egypt, staying there for a few years, coming back, you know, it's not as easy, especially considering borders and political context of today. And I think for me, at least, the biggest challenge I face right now in my spiritual journey is hope. How do you maintain hope in a hopeless context? And I recently wrote a reflection on that. And really, that's, I think, where faith comes in, and you try to find, find that sense of hope in your faith, whether it's people, you know, I mean, my situation in retrospect can be a bit more privileged than other Palestinians, but because I lived in Jerusalem and I worked more with Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, I really, it's changed my perspective and my understanding of the conflict. And you know, we always ask, like, what is the message of hope for Palestinian Christians, especially within their faith, but also within their political context. And so we try to do a lot of nonviolent, nonviolent action that tries to bring the situation, give situation a new light or a different perspective. Because as you know, as you get into Christmas, you get more into the holiday spirit, because you want to experience that joy with your family. You want to experience the hope in this refreshing season. And for us as Palestinians, we also see it as an opportunity to let others be reminded that a political context we need peace, and we need justice, and we need to be proactive about it. So I just we can share some photos of things that Palestinian Christians, especially during Christmas, they try to connect their political or reality with the message of Christmas. I think I can share. So this is a few years back. These metal things there from tear gas canisters that in Bethlehem, especially, that they would throw at protesters. And so one idea was to take these canisters and turn them into Christmas ornaments, and they were selling them for a while. And again, it's kind of remembering the hope, the story of Christmas in a context that's still going through a lot of war, an occupation. Unfortunately, even the images of the nativity, right? This is to remind that, again, that place we put Bethlehem in, and you know, the Joseph and Mary traveling, and in reality there is a checkpoint, there's a physical wall that disrupts the story, and it affects Palestinian Christians, and they want to bring attention to that. I mean, it's a sad image. It portrays a very painful reality, but it is our reality, and I think we want it to be addressed, and we want to seek that justice. Again, I mean, these are nonviolent protesters where people wear Santas, and they try to seek their own expressions of justice. This is again in Bethlehem. And this is one of my favorite. I have one of those sets. It's a nativity set, but it also puts a wall between them to remind us that the reality that if the story were to happen, the wise men wouldn't be able to come to Bethlehem today because of the occupation and the physical wall. I think, I mean, it's a big challenge, even for me, just to try to speak to you about an event that celebrated the arrival of the Messiah, that this restored hope has come. But for us, it's a big challenge to see it in our reality. I think recently there was a statement by the Council of Churches in Jerusalem, where because of the pandemic, Israel has banned travel from abroad, and they made one exception for Taglit, right, for Jews in the diaspora to come and have their Jewish experience. And churches thought it was a discriminatory exception because Christians at this time want to come and they want to come and celebrate, but they are banned. And so they're raising kind of these unequal treatment considering the context. So I think, how do we, just kind of, how do we navigate this reality into our context, especially at such a time? I think we draw from the Christmas story, renewed hope, renewed peace, renewed motivation to keep seeking justice, because that's where we draw our understanding of these things in reality. But at the same time, we can't forget that reality is hard and it's very challenging, and we should keep trying as much as we can to close that gap between reality and where we want to go. I think I'll stop here, and I don't know if we have time for questions, but thank you for letting me share today with you.
Thank you so much, Shadia. This is a really powerful, important talk. I learned a lot from it, and that's even with studying the conflict for a long time. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and telling us about your experience and how Christmas is celebrated in Palestine. Thank you. I think we have one more song from Bruce and Cheryl. And we'll do our closing prayer. And then if you're okay to stay just a little bit later, if folks have some questions, is that okay with you? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. When you're ready, Bruce and Cheryl.
Before the marvel of this night, adoring, fold your wings and bow, then tear the sky apart with light, and with your news the world endow, proclaim the birth of Christ and peace, that fear and death and sorrow cease. Sing peace, sing gift of peace. Sing peace, sing gift of peace. Awake the sleeping world with song. This is the day that God has made. Assemble here, celestial throng, in royal splendor come arrayed. Give earth a glimpse of heavenly bliss, a teasing taste of what they miss. Sing bliss, sing bliss, sing endless bliss. Sing bliss, sing endless bliss. The love that we have always known, our constant joy and endless light, now to the loveless world be shown.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Friends, let us go forth in love, in care for all, keeping in mind those who are still suffering in so many ways, our Palestinian friends who still cannot go to their holy sites to worship, who cannot meet with their extended families and be with them during these holidays. Let's remember our friends in all places who are still separated from each other. And going forth in the new year, let's just take up the spirit of Jesus and try to bring peace and hope and love wherever we go. Amen.